This is the U.S. debt clock for world debt. 20 different countries with the ratio of external and public debt. This can be found at usdebtclock.org/world. Whatever that slashy thing's called, debtclock.html. All the links used in the more information box. And when I look at the information on the top of the screen, I can see how they explain what the public and external debts happen to be. For example, external is the total public and private debt owed to non-residents, repayable in foreign currency, goods, or services. If that confuses you a little, I'm not surprised. And the public debt to GDP, it's stated here, the cumulative total of all government borrowings less repayments that are denominated in a country's home currency. Same thing again if that number confuses you. And we got some big numbers here. You can see over 100%. And when it's over 100%, that means your debt's greater than your value of all assets. GDP is a fancy word for saying what everything your country has for value. And when we go back to this external and public debt, we can use Wikipedia to explain to us what it is. An external debt or foreign debt is that part of the total debt in a country that is owed to creditors outside the country. The debtors can be the government, corporations, or private households. The debt includes money owed to private commercial banks, other governments, other international financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank. So as it sounds, external money owed to other countries. Argentina owes Canada and France and South Korea and maybe China and Mexico and China, and Brazil and China and China again. I'm saying China a lot because it would have to be a guess of mine that many countries get most of their imports from China. And thus that would create a lot of debt to China. Moving on, the public debt, which can also be known as government debt. When I did a search for public debt, this came right up to government debt. And it says also known as public debt and national debt. You've heard the national debt horror stories, over 13 trillion and 14, then 15, and maybe they'll surpass $1 trillion mark in a day or two at some point later on. I don't know. I'm just saying that based on my exponential math knowledge. Moving on. This is money owed by any level of government, either central government, federal, municipal, or local. So I guess the Federal Reserve would count as this. Do I get Federal Reserve on here? Let's just do a search. Nothing on here for Federal Reserve. However, as the government draws its income from much of the population, government debt is an indirect debt to the taxpayers. Government debt can be categorized as internal debt owed to lenders within the country and external debt owed to foreign lenders. Governments usually borrow by issuing securities, government bonds, and bills. Less creditworthy countries sometimes borrow directly from supranational institutions. That's another way of saying how they create money. It's an issuance of bonds. Therefore, you take a federal government like the Federal Reserve who issues bonds, which they do, banks, or they issue money for bonds. It's a complicated but simple procedure where the government or the Federal Reserve can lend a certain bank, let's take, say, JP Morgan for this example, lend them maybe $100 billion. And then they take that $100 billion and they pay interest, which is the interest rates you hear Ben Bernanke talk about. the ones that are close to 0 or 0.25%. So therefore, they would have to pay 0.25% within the year of the money that they borrowed, which thus, because only money can be created this way, guarantees that this debt has to exist. There's nothing around it stating that it cannot. Now, China has a low percentage, 38% when you add them together. A lot of it might be accounts receivables of debt from other countries for their GDP numbers. They still have public debt of 19%, and they can pay it off because they're a creditor nation, a debtor nation. They're a creditor nation. Yes, they're the creditor nation, and because they receive payments from other countries, they can use that to pay down their own public debt, which is why it's so low. I mean, England's at 426 on external. Ireland over 1,000. Japan 200 on the public. It says the U.S. is 64%, and with their numbers of GDP, it most likely would be, because it's their numbers, it's their information. Now, all of these clocks are pretty much going lower. This one I think is going. All of them are going higher. This one is this one's going lower, yes. And there was another one in here. I think Mexico has one going lower. There's not many that are decreasing in size. And 40 trillion is the national debt. Now, how accurate this is, I don't know, because if I click on America, it says the public debt is 9 million. Or trillion, sorry. 9 trillion. So this is a little outdated. Maybe the debt is like 60 million. I heard something on Oh Canada, the movie, that it was like 80 or 120 or some huge number like that, which means that we owe money to, you know, that planet that we found recently? Maybe we owe it to them. No. Or maybe it's because of how money is created with government bonds and securities and all of those fancy financial instrument thingies that we hear about all the time. Because the current debts that we are facing right now are growing exponentially. 13.6 trillion and rising. It's at the point where it will grow 1 million over a commercial on the television screen. The debt per taxpayer is 122,240. And yet you hear analysts stating, well, how can we reduce debt? Well, if you want a strategic move that works, destroy the system that creates the debt. It's guaranteed. The debt is guaranteed as long as you got bonds and all of those other fancy financial words. Bye-bye.